Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
Part of it is really doing an analysis about sort of where am I and where am I trying to go, and then what are my highest priorities right now, because often we can't work on everything from the very beginning.
Right. That's true. That's absolutely true. It's just, I think it's important that people hear that, the thought process that goes into going into rehab, but then also, and it's different for everybody, of course, but also the thought process coming out, because it's, by the time you make the decision to go into rehab, it sounds like your life is pretty much in shambles. And so you go into rehab and you learn the things you need to learn to try, the life skills you need to learn to try to stay sober. Then you come out and you're sort of having to put your life back together again, brick by brick, so to speak. And so
Yes.
you're gonna have to do it slowly. It's gonna have to take time. Sounds like you gave yourself the break, because I'm presuming from knowing you as long as I have now, which is a brief time, that you're not the most patient person in the world, right? And so for you to feel fulfilled, it probably took quite a bit for you to have a conversation with yourself where you go, okay, back up, take this, you know what I mean? Take this step by step. This is a process, and we're going to be doing this for a while before we ultimately get to where we want to be. So
Yes.
you finished law school. Talk about how that felt, because you've now been through, you have a history degree, you've been through 10 years of abuse, you've been through rehab, you pieced your life back together over a number of years. You made a major sacrifice to go back to law school for 3 years. Number one, you got accepted. That had to have felt amazing,
It did.
right? And then number two, you get back into law school and you finish, which is a major accomplishment. Okay. Major sacrifice. What did that feel like when you graduated, when you finished law school with your degree? How did you feel?
I will say the most joyful moment may have been when I got accepted again.
Yeah.
Like that was, because I really wasn't sure. And
Yeah.
in fact, I applied to Berkeley, and at first they didn't take me back, and so they rejected me, and I went to Hastings, University of California, Hastings in San Francisco, which is a good law school, but it's not top 10.
Right.
But I was number 3 out of 400 in my class at Hastings, and then Berkeley took me back. And so I did my last 2 years at Berkeley. So that
So,
transfer point was also a moment of joy because I got back something I lost.
so you had to go backwards to go forward.
Yes, I had to, yes, in a way, yes, yes. I
That's
mean, don't
sort
get,
of the
yeah,
theme of your life,
yes,
right? You
yes.
keep going backwards to go forwards. I mean, you're getting forward, right? And you're sort of leaping now, but man, this has been like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So Berkeley turns you down. That
Yes.
had to have been devastating, but you didn't give up. You went to Hastings, right? You proved yourself at Hastings, and then apparently you reapplied at Berkeley,
Yes, for a transfer.
and Berkeley took you.
Yes.
That's kind of cool,
Yeah,
right?
it was.
So then Berkeley takes you back. Now you're back, and you finish, and you graduate. That had to have been incredible.
It was, and I actually did really well in law school as well. I mean, in some ways, because I was an older student and I
Yeah,
had those 6.5 years of getting more disciplined and focused, and also my relationship with my partner, we had actually saved it, and I was in a very stable, life space. But yes, graduating from Berkeley, doing as well as I did, it was a joyful moment. It was really sort of like the cherry on top, especially because I had lost it.
yeah,
Especially because I had lost it.
That's really something. See, because you lose something like that and you go through what you've gone through, it has to be something that you cherish. And you're right, you're older than most of the law students there, right? You have a lot of life that you've lived and a lot of, sort of bad judgment that created wisdom, right? So you're in a place where you're a lot wiser than you were. Um, that's awesome. That's really cool. So
Thank
you
you.
graduate from law school, then where do you go?
I went to work at a big law firm in Silicon Valley, which is where I lived. And so
Okay.
end up doing litigation. And so I did like complex business and securities litigation at a very large law firm.
And how long were you there?
4 years, four
Okay.
years. And then it was really about, because you were talking about getting back things or,
Yeah.
uh, I mean, but then it was really about, is this how I want to keep living? Because big
Right.
law is very time demanding. I mean,
Right.
you're working like, 60, 70, 80 hours every week. I mean, on a regular basis. And it never gets better. The partners work as many hours as you work. And so by now I'm in, my mid 40s, and it's really okay. I got this. I got, like the top tier job that you can get, which is wonderful. But at the same time, I have almost no time for my friends or my husband or my family. And I remember my therapist said, okay, you've climbed the mountain, but what do you want your top of the mountain to look like? Is it this? And it was like, no, actually, it's not this.
Yeah.
And so I ended up leaving, and I ended up working for the federal government doing big class actions. I was still doing very high end litigation, but the work demands were somewhat less. I mean, the work demands, were higher than the typical government lawyer because of the cases I was doing, but were a lot less than when I was in private practice. And so that was the transition.
So the reason for going to the federal government was was because it was a challenge, or was it because you had a better lifestyle that way?
Well, I wanted both, right? I mean, my goal was to get the job that was intellectually challenging, but fewer hours and yet a reasonable salary. And so
Okay.
that's how I ended up working for the federal government. I mean, I wouldn't have gone if there wasn't an intellectual challenge there because, as you said, I would have gotten bored.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that feeling about you. I don't know why. So how long are you with the federal government?
Well, I eventually became a federal judge. Before I worked for them for 6.5 years, and before I became a judge.
So what made you decide to become a judge?
Well, it was interesting because, I didn't actually know that I became an administrative law judge for the federal government. And I didn't actually know this job existed. But when I
Yeah.
became a federal attorney, I saw other people get that job. And so
Right.
then it captured my attention. Oh, this is another job I could apply for in the future. It's something new, something different, another step forward. So that's how I ended up focused on it, was because like with many things, I saw other people do it ahead of me and I paid attention and thought, yeah, maybe I should do that too.
Exactly why we do this podcast. Just so you know, it's exactly why we do this podcast. We do this so that people can see where you came from, right? And they see similarities in how they grew up versus how you grew up, right? And all of a sudden they connect. It's exactly why we do it, because
Yeah.
it's just like, and I don't know how much time you spent around kids. But I had two, I have two, and they're 24 and 25. Well, the 25-year-old, when he was born, it was just him and I and my wife, right? And then the baby comes along, the youngest, and she wants to walk because he's walking. She wants to
Uh,
run because he's running. She wants to be on stage because he's on stage, right? And I still remember she's 2, 3 years old, and she's just like me. So she's incredibly impatient. She's incredibly fired up. She's incredibly energetic, right? All those things that annoy people. And she's on my lap, right? And she likes being on daddy's lap. It's a cool thing. It's a very cool thing. Trust me, I'm not complaining. But I couldn't get her to sit still. She's wiggling all the time, wiggling, right? And then I'd hold on to her as much as I could. I'm trying to watch my son on stage. I'm holding on to her, and all of a sudden she's gone. And by the time I'm up and headed towards her, she's almost on stage. I mean, she's quick. And it's all about they see their sibling, right? We see other people in our lives that we want to emulate, that we want to do what they're doing because they seem happy, right? They seem fulfilled and that type of thing. And there's some of us that look at it and go, and I know this isn't you, but there's some of us that look at it and go, oh, I can do way better than them. I know you've never had that. I know that's never entered your mind, right? But yeah, it's exactly why we do this. So 6.5 years, and then you make the decision to become a judge. Did you enjoy being a judge?
I enjoyed parts of it. I mean, it's interesting because as a lawyer, you feel the pressure of doing the best job possible for your client,
Yeah.
right? But as a judge, I am the decision maker about an issue that's of critical importance to the person standing in front of me. And
Right.
so you really do feel that um that concern to do your absolute best, to do your best to make sure you're coming to the right decision. So there is that sort of pressure about it. But at the same time, it is an important decision, and I certainly did my best to pay attention to my work and to make sure that I was, well versed in the law. That I was researching anything I didn't know, and that I was doing my best to come to the right conclusion.
So were you a taskmaster when it came to the attorneys that appeared in front of you?
I certainly tried to keep them to an appropriate standard of
Good.
behavior, but and also though I saw a lot of unrepresented people, and so that's a different dynamic, right? With a lawyer, you're expecting they're going to do A, B, and C,
Right.
but when they're unrepresented, I really have an obligation to make sure that I'm helping them get all the information to me that I need. Asking if they don't know to tell me things, to asking them the questions to make sure that I'm gathering all the potentially positive information on their side. And so it's sort of a different relationship when they're represented and unrepresented.
Yeah, it's gotta be tough. And having been an attorney, right, you have an idea of what these attorneys should be doing and what standard they should be upholding. And I have to tell you, I don't see that all the time, and I've had I don't know how many judges now in my life that have come to me and said, you should consider getting into law. You should consider a future in the legal industry. It's like, wow, right? Um, but I haven't done it, and I'm probably not going to. I'm 58, going to be 58 next week. So yeah, probably not going to do it. But I do love what I'm doing. So I know you can't tell because I hide it well, but I do love it. So as a judge, how long were you a judge?
5.5 years.
Okay. And what was your favorite thing about being a judge and what was your least favorite thing?
I mean, the least favorite was definitely the workload pressure. That we had certain, goals like case number goals and things, and sometimes they weren't as realistic as I thought they should be. Um, but the thing that I guess I liked best was there was a lot of teamwork. I mean, you're the judge, but you have attorneys and staff members that you really rely on to help
Yeah.
you develop the case and get it in good order. And I would issue instructions, clearly, here's my decision, here's all my reasoning, here's the evidence I think is important, but someone else would, I had to rely on them to write it, and then I
Right.
would review it and make sure everything in there was necessary. So there is that sense of teamwork. Even you think it's not like you're on your own, right? You are participating with other people who are supporting you and helping you do it in an efficient and effective way.
Right. What was your least favorite thing?
It was the workload. It was
Um,
the pace of it. Yeah, yeah. The sometimes unrealistic case number expectations.
there's only so many hours in a day, right?
There are. I mean, don't get me wrong. I was always a top rated, judge. I had a very low reversal rate. I tried to, do good work and not and all that. But yeah, there's pressures. I mean, you're a judge. You still have pressures from the managing judges. And also your own pressure to make sure that people aren't waiting a long time for your
Yeah.
decision, right? I mean, delay is costly to them, if only in stress and strain while they're waiting to find out what your decision is.
Yeah. It's gotta be just grueling. So, question for you. As a judge, and I've never interviewed a judge before, so this is a whole new thing for me. How important or how involved are you in thinking about reversal rate? In other words, how much are you thinking about sort of legacy and and what potentially could happen at the next level should they appeal?
I mean, so for me, I was an administrative law judge for the federal government. So I worked for a specific agency, Social Security. And the reason I was focused on my appeal numbers were because um, well, first of all, management, tells you where you are compared to other people and all that. But it's also that if the appeals court wants something, they're saying you didn't do this or you didn't do that. Because usually when it came back, it wasn't you were wrong. It's you need to do this again because you didn't check this box or that box. And so I always paid attention to the reasoning of the appeals court because sometimes it literally meant, okay, well, if in that situation, again, I add this one sentence and make it clear, well, then it doesn't come back on appeal. And that also it means that it's a less burdensome process for everyone, right? And so, I mean, I always did my best to follow the law anyway. And so it usually wasn't like, what the heck did Judge O'Connor do? This is crazy. It was
Right.
usually, you didn't clearly say this part of the standard, or you didn't clearly apply the facts here, or something like that. And
Gotcha.
so, but it's a learn. I mean, you have to view it as a learning opportunity, right? What can I learn from the reason it's coming back and the rationale? Sometimes you think the appeals court's just wrong, and sometimes they are wrong.
Yeah.
But you have to look at it with an open mind, not sort of like an ego defensive mind, but actually
Yeah.
an open mind to see what you can learn from it.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking ego was involved.
Yeah.
I was thinking in terms of it's got to be kind of a pressure cooker feeling, because you have on the one side, like you're saying, you have these managing judges that are saying, hey, you need to see more cases. You need to get more cases through. You need to push, right, this camel through the eye of the needle, so to speak, right? And then on the other side of it, you have this group that potentially will hear your decision and look at it, with a critical eye to an extent. And I wasn't thinking ego, I was thinking just pressure, like just, right, it's got to feel like your head's in a vice sometimes.
Well, and that's why efficiency was always one of my focuses. Like,
Yeah.
over time, I developed a way to take my notes when I'm reviewing the case and then, to put them into the decision and to work with the decision writer so that my instructions were clear. So I got back what I expected back with
Yeah.
limited editing. So there are efficiencies that you can build into the system. And you're right. You need to be efficient because you don't have infinite time,
Yeah.
but also it reduces the risk of error. And
Yeah.
so you can build those things in place once if you're focused on them and if you learn from what's happening on appeal.
Right. So at some point you decide after 5 years or 5.5 years, you decide to leave the bench. What makes you decide to do that?
Well, there were a few reasons, but one of them was actually medical. To be honest, I'm just
Oh.
not able to work full time anymore, and they don't like part time judges for some reason. But the good thing for me about the retirement was that it allowed me to do service in a new way for my recovery community. And so
Okay.
when I was a judge, my memoir is out, right, from junkie to judge: one woman's
Mhm.
triumph over trauma and addiction. And I had been working on that as a hobby when I was a judge, like it was a side project. But and I had also joined the board for Life Ring Secular Recovery when I was a judge, so I was sort of participating and being of service again in the recovery community. But once I retired, I could do a lot of things I couldn't do when I was a judge.
Gotcha.
Because it could be distracting, to my job.
Yeah.
And so, like, I had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal where I announced that I was a former judge and a former meth addict. And
Mhm.
so that would have been hard to do when I was still working as a judge.
A little
I
bit of a
joined.
complication.
Yeah, it could be. It wasn't that I wasn't comfortable with being. I mean, I was 20 years
No,
sober
no,
when I
it's
was
not bad.
appointed a judge.
Yeah.
20 years sober, right? It was
Yeah.
more that it could be a distraction, and I
Yeah.
didn't want that distraction on my work.
Well,
Um,
and you also feel responsible if you bring if you yeah, right, if there is a distraction, you feel responsible that you brought that
yes,
distraction on the team, right?
yes,
And
yes.
on the process and what you're trying to do. And so, yeah, you gotta kind of pick your time, right? So yeah, I get it. I totally understand. So you make that decision. Sort of your medical situation makes that decision for you, it sounds like. So you end up deciding to leave the bench and you're now full on writing the book, right? What makes you decide to write the book? It's junkie to judge, right?
Yes, and so when I was appointed the federal judge, it was actually just sort of a natural reflection time, right? Like,
Yeah.
how the heck did I go from shooting meth at 17
Right.
until 32, and now I'm a judge? Like,
Yeah.
how the heck did that happen?
Right.
And so it was an impetus for me to start revisiting all of that. But I started thinking about, could my story be of use?
Yeah.
Like, is my story potentially useful? And so I started actually reading recovery memoir, which I hadn't read much of, and
Mhm.
what I saw wasn't what I wanted to write. Like, a lot of recovery memoirs sort of leap into the chaos of addiction, but they don't show where it came from.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to show, just sort of as an example, as an education tool to show how it happens for many of us that you use drugs at an early age like I did and get a severe addiction at an
Yeah.
early age like I did. And then a lot of recovery memoirs at the end, it's sort of like I went to a couple meetings and everything was great. It's like,
Yeah.
well, that's not how recovery works.
Not at all.
And so 30% of my book is my first 3 years of recovery. And it goes
Mm.
into more detail about building that individual plan and taking control and the trauma substance use recovery interplay and all of that. And so I thought,
I'm glad you went into that detail. Sorry to interrupt.
that's
I'm
okay.
glad you went into that detail because it's something that you don't see, right? And and part of it, honestly, I think, and again, I've never been, you know, I'm addicted to some things, but not right. But not drugs. I mean, right.
Mhm.
I'm probably an alcohol addict. I don't drink anymore, but when I drink it, I can't ever drink one, right? It's like, it's yeah. It's sort of the gene that I inherited. But I find it fascinating that, and I think it's a protective thing where these authors will tell their story, but they tell the story in terms of sort of the most salacious things,
Right.
right? But they don't talk about what happened that leads up to it. And I think it's because they're protecting themselves, but they also think that that's boring to people. It's not. There are people that are going through trauma every day, right? And a lot of this substance abuse that takes place is them self-medicating because of these things that happened in the past. If they don't get to therapy, they don't figure out a way to deal with it, don't figure out a way to sort of retire it, they are heading down a path of destruction again.
Yeah, and so like I didn't want to write a memoir that was out there 22 times, but I didn't see memoirs that were doing this whole
Yeah,
arc that I wanted to show.
yeah,
And it partly was as an educational tool. I mean, when I talk, sometimes I really talk about the interplay between trauma and mental health and substance use disorder. Like, for example, if 55 to 75% of the people that have an addiction also have another mental health condition in
yeah,
addition to that, right?
yeah,
That's very high, and people don't always appreciate that, or they don't understand how it complicates recovery, that you really need to have not just substance use addressed, but you need these other mental health conditions addressed. And so
right,
I thought about, yeah, I wanted to show the whole arc. And so
yeah,
I started in childhood and I go up to the end of my 3rd year of recovery to try to give a better, more realistic understanding of how it evolved, my drug use evolved, and also how recovery really plays out in the real world.
that's awesome. I'm so glad you did that. So so what was the one thing that made you decide to write the book?
I thought it could be of use. I thought I
Mm,
could be an example. Also because I did a more individual plan, and all the memoirs I saw were 12-step, which is great, but a lot of people today are more interested in doing a plan that they're sort of in charge of and that's tailored to them, and I didn't see that memoir out there either. And
yeah,
so I wanted to have an example of that. So it was really that I looked at it and I thought, I don't see this book out there. I think could be an important book, a useful book. It could add value. It could help. So I decided to write it. And the other thing I'll say is it was an intellectual exercise,
yeah,
right? I mean, I was a great legal writer, but writing a memoir is completely different. It's
yeah,
written like a novel. And I like the challenge. I mean, I took classes. How do you write a good scene? How do you get emotion in? How do you write good dialogue? I
yeah.
also did like the intellectual stimulation of figuring out how to write a good book.
There's a real art to it.
Yes.
Honestly, there's a real art to it. I always thought of myself as a good storyteller. People have always told me you're an exceptional storyteller, right? And I have a ghostwriter that I've hired to help me write my 4 books that I'm writing. And he told me, he said, you're really terrible at storytelling. Okay, let me give you permission to be honest. Wow, right? And this is the same guy, by the way, that would send people to me to be counseled, and he'd say, "Be prepared. It's going to sting. He's going to tell you the truth, and it's going to sting." Right? This is the same guy that said that about me to other people, and then people would go back to him and go, "You're right. It stung." You know, he didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. He told me what the truth was. So you write the book, and it's obviously a success. Obviously, it's helping people. And you're also involved in other things. You're speaking, you're leading, I mean, I see all kinds of things that you're working on. Talk about sort of post book what you've been working on.
Yeah, so I mean, I write opinion pieces. So I had pieces in the Wall Street Journal and the Los Angeles Times and Recovery Today and others. I'm on the board for Life Ring Secular Recovery. I'm on the board for She Recovers Foundation. I also do a lot of speaking. I speak at I do workshops. I've created a number of different workshops for different target audiences. I train lawyers and judges. I created a continuing legal education training on
Wow.
substance use and recovery, focused on attorneys, which actually lawyers have double the rate of addiction as the
Yeah.
general population. And I talk about why that is and the impact on their practice and the ethics rules and all that. And then I do keynotes, fundraisers for recovery organizations that I support and things like that. So it's a wide variety. I mean, it's definitely part-time, although it's a struggle, right? Because it's hard to turn down good opportunities.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have all the deadlines of work, so I can manage all this. But it's rewarding because I
Yeah.
can tell my whole story, my whole truth for the first time, and I can be of service in a new way. And so it's been a very rewarding time of life for me.
I can only imagine how it's got to feel. So, if somebody wants to work with you, if somebody's looking to bring you in to speak to their group, that kind of thing, how would they reach you?
So you can always message me through my website, which is junkie2judge.com. And I always emphasize you could forget my name and just remember the junkie judge and you can Google me. Okay, you can find me. But my
He's
website
right, by
has
the way. I've done it.
my website has a messaging feature and I answer all messages and I do get speaking requests that way sometimes, but also friends or family sometimes or people struggling may have a question for me, what would you recommend for us, or what if, here's the situation, any advice. So I'm open to any messages that come through the website. I will respond.
Awesome. So what does tomorrow look like? What's in store for tomorrow? Are we writing another book? What are we doing? We're lighting the world on fire, right?
Yeah, I don't plan at this point, and never say never, but
Right.
I don't plan on writing a book, although I do plan on writing more opinion pieces and continuing the speaking, and continuing doing my board work. So right now, I think I've landed on a good pattern.
Yeah.
And although my husband says I should look retirement up in the dictionary because I don't know what it means, but but it's a good mix. It's a good mix of activities for me, and it's a good opportunity to work with a lot of different people in different ways.
Are you trying to retire? Is that what you're trying to do?
I'm I I'm trying to keep it half time, the work that I
Gotcha.
do. That's
Gotcha.
the trick. That's a challenge. Just keeping it half time is a challenge.
Gotcha. So you're a recovering retiree? Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying?
Although I went straight from being a judge to this, so there wasn't
Right.
really any gap in between, right? So
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Why take time off? Right. How's your health? You doing good?
It's stable. It's stable, and I mean, I could have kept being a judge if they would have let me work at this pace, but they just don't do it. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, there's a big difference between the pressure of doing what I'm doing and the pressure of working full time and working
Yeah.
at those hours. So,
Yeah. No, it's true.
this is a very manageable lifestyle for me at this point.
I gotcha. Is there anything else you'd like to cover before we wrap up?
I just mentioned the books on Amazon and all the usual sites, or you can get bookstore has it or can get it. And also, I am on Twitter at Mary Beth _ and I do not spend hours arguing with people on Twitter. But I do provide the new studies that come out about addiction or recovery. Articles, my recovery thoughts. So if anybody's interested in that, you can follow me there.
So what's the latest? What's your latest thoughts on addiction, recovery, that kind of thing? What you've been seeing?
I mean, I'm a little concerned about the refocus on criminalization because of the overdose epidemic. We're sort of going backward into techniques and strategies that have failed in the past because of fear, and so that worries me. But certainly the overdose epidemic in general is a big concern and something we need to do better at.
So is it an education thing?
Well, I mean, it's actually a treatment availability thing in large part,
Gotcha.
right? And so I sometimes, when we do policy discussions on drug use, I think there's this fundamental assumption that everybody who wants treatment has access to it, and that is
Mm,
simply not true.
okay,
And so then, if the number one thing we need to do is to develop a robust system of treatment on demand, which we don't have right now.
gotcha. Well, Mary Beth O'Connor, I can't thank you enough for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. This has been a lot of fun. It's been a very fast hour, and I've thoroughly enjoyed every second of it. Thank you again for being here.
And thank you again for having me.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.